The morning mist clung to the mountains like a stubborn ghost, refusing to lift despite the sun's desperate attempts to burn through. General Marcus Blackwood stood at the edge of the military compound, his weathered hands gripping binoculars so tightly his knuckles had turned white. For 3 days, he had watched his best marksman fail at what should have been an impossible task, yet one that had become absolutely necessary. The target sat motionless on a rocky outcrop 2,670 meters away, nearly 2.5 miles of treacherous mountain terrain, unpredictable wind patterns, and atmospheric pressure that changed by the hour. It wasn't just any target. Intelligence reports confirmed it was the position of Commander Viktor Kozlov, a war criminal whose capture had become the military's highest priority. The man had orchestrated the bombing of 3 civilian hospitals and was planning another attack within 48 hours. Blackwood lowered his binoculars and turned to face the line of soldiers behind him. 12 of the military's finest marksmen stood at attention, their faces bearing the weight of repeated failure. Each had taken their shot over the past 3 days. Each had missed, some by inches, others by feet. But in a mission where precision meant the difference between justice and tragedy, close wasn't good enough. Sergeant Rodriguez stepped forward, his uniform still bearing dust from his morning attempt. His voice carried the frustration of a man who had never failed at anything involving a rifle. "Sir, the wind patterns are impossible to predict at that distance. We've calculated for elevation, humidity, even the Coriolis effect, but there are too many variables. The target is simply too far." Blackwood had heard similar explanations from 11 other marksmen. Each was technically correct. The shot was at the absolute edge of what physics and human capability could achieve. The bullet would travel for over 3 seconds before reaching its target, during which time wind could push it off course by several feet. The slightest tremor in the shooter's hand, the tiniest miscalculation in atmospheric conditions, would render the shot useless. "Sir," Rodriguez continued, his voice dropping slightly, "perhaps we should consider alternative methods. A drone strike or a ground assault team could know." Blackwood's voice cut through the mountain air like a blade. "A drone strike would level half the mountain and kill the dozen civilians Kozlov is using as human shields. A ground assault would take 18 hours minimum to reach that position, and by then, he'll be gone. Intelligence says he moves his base every 2 days. This is our last window." The general turned back toward the distant target, his mind racing through possibilities. The mission had consumed every waking moment for the past week. Kozlov wasn't just another enemy combatant. He was a symbol of everything wrong with modern warfare, a man who hid behind innocent people while planning attacks on more innocent people. His capture would save hundreds, possibly thousands of lives. Behind him, the marksmen shifted uncomfortably. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were legends in their own right. Staff Sergeant Chun had the record for the longest confirmed kill in the Pacific Theater. Corporal Williams had never missed a target under 1,000 meters in 5 years of active duty. Master Sergeant Thompson had written the manual on long-distance shooting that every sniper in the military studied. Yet none of them had come close to making this shot. "General," came a quiet voice from the back of the group. Everyone turned to see Captain Sarah Mitchell, the unit's intelligence officer, stepping forward with a tablet in her hands. "I've been reviewing the personnel files, looking for anyone we might have missed." Blackwood raised an eyebrow. "Captain, we've already assembled the 12 best marksmen in the entire military. If they can't make the shot, sir, with respect, we've assembled the 12 best marksmen according to official records and competition scores. But what if the person we need isn't officially a marksman at all?" The general studied Mitchell's face, noting the careful way she was choosing her words. After 25 years in the military, he had learned to recognize when someone had information they weren't sure how to share. "Explain." Mitchell glanced at her tablet, then back at the general. "There's a woman in the motor pool, Maria Santos. She's listed as a mechanic, 3rd class, but her file contains some interesting annotations, such as 3 separate commanding officers have noted unusual incidents. Last year in Afghanistan, when their convoy was pinned down by a sniper, Santos requested permission to return fire. Her CO gave her a rifle as a last resort. She eliminated the target with a single shot at 1,847 meters using iron sights on a rifle she'd never fired before. Rodriguez scoffed. "Captain, every soldier has stories about lucky shots. One incident doesn't make someone qualified for. There are two other incidents," Mitchell interrupted firmly. Somalia, 2019. Santos was serving water purification duty when rebels attacked their camp. She borrowed a rifle from a wounded guard and eliminated 3 targets at ranges exceeding 1,200 meters in under 2 minutes. Again, iron sights. Again, a weapon she'd never used. Blackwood felt something stirring in his chest. Not quite hope, but curiosity. And the third incident. Syria, 2020. Her unit was providing humanitarian aid when they came under fire from an insurgent position 2,100 meters away. Santos requested permission to engage. Her commanding officer later wrote that she seemed to calculate the shot in her head without any instruments, took one shot, and eliminated the threat. The officer recommended her for sniper training, but Santos declined. She declined. Sergeant Rodriguez looked incredulous. Who turns down sniper training? Mitchell looked back at her tablet. According to the notes, Santos said she didn't want to be a killer. She just wanted to fix trucks and help people. But when people were in danger, she trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. Blackwood was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. In his experience, the most dangerous people were often those who didn't want to be dangerous. Where is Private Santos now? She's in the motor pool, about half a mile down the mountain, working on a supply truck that broke down yesterday. The general looked back toward the distant target, then at his 12 failed marksmen, then at Mitchell. "Captain, I want you to go get Private Santos. Don't tell her why, just bring her here." "Sir, shouldn't we at least verify these stories first? Check with her previous commanding officers, review the incident reports." "Captain," Blackwood's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "We have less than 40 hours before Kozlov disappears, and innocent people die. I don't have time for verification. If there's even a chance this woman can make the shot my 12 best marksmen can't, then I need to know. Now." As Mitchell hurried down the mountainside toward the motor pool, Blackwood turned back to study the target through his binoculars. Somewhere in that distant rock formation, a war criminal was planning his next atrocity, surrounded by civilians who had no idea their lives hung in the balance of a shot that seemed impossible to make. The general had built his career on calculated risks and gut instincts. Right now, both were telling him that Maria Santos might be their last hope, even if she was just a mechanic who fixed trucks and claimed she didn't want to be a killer. In the distance, a supply truck's engine roared to life, the sound echoing across the mountain valley like a promise of possibilities yet to be discovered. Maria Santos wiped the grease from her hands with a worn rag, her dark eyes focused intently on the engine before her. The supply truck had been giving them trouble for days, a stubborn fuel injection problem that had stumped 3 other mechanics. But Maria had a gift for understanding machines, the same way some people had a gift for music or mathematics. She could hear what engines were telling her, feel their problems through vibrations that traveled up through her hands. The 32-year-old woman had grown up in rural New Mexico, where her father ran a small auto repair shop that served ranchers and travelers passing through their tiny desert town. By age 12, she could rebuild a carburetor blindfolded. By 16, she was the best mechanic within 100 miles, though few people knew it because her father took credit for most of her work. When she joined the military at 18, it wasn't to escape or to find adventure like so many of her peers. She joined because she wanted stability, structure, and the chance to use her skills to help people. The military needed mechanics, and Maria needed purpose. It seemed like a perfect match. She never mentioned to anyone that her grandfather had taught her to shoot when she was 8 years old, using an old hunting rifle to protect their small farm from coyotes and the occasional rattlesnake. He had been a sniper in Vietnam, though he rarely spoke about it. "Some people have steady hands and patient hearts," he used to tell her. "God gives gifts to those who will use them wisely." "Private Santos?" Maria looked up to see Captain Mitchell approaching, her uniform crisp despite the mountain dust that covered everything else in the camp. The intelligence officer's face was serious but not unkind. though Maria immediately sensed this wasn't a social visit. "Yes, ma'am. The general would like to speak with you." Maria felt her stomach tighten. In her 14 years of military service, being summoned to speak with a general was never good news. She quickly ran through recent events in her mind, trying to think of any mistakes or violations she might have committed. The truck repair was taking longer than expected, but surely that wasn't worth the general's attention. "Ma'am, did I do something wrong? If this is about the supply truck, I can have it running within the hour. The fuel injection system needed complete rebuilding, but I've got it sorted now. You're not in trouble, Private. Just please come with me." Mitchell's tone was carefully neutral, which somehow made Maria even more nervous. As they walked up the winding mountain path toward the command post, Maria tried to imagine what a general could possibly want with a motor pool mechanic. Around them, the camp bustled with activity, soldiers moving supplies, vehicles rumbling past, helicopters circling overhead like mechanical vultures. "Captain," Maria ventured after they had walked in silence for several minutes, "can you at least tell me what this is about?" Mitchell glanced at her sideways, studying Maria's face as if trying to solve a puzzle. "Have you ever heard of Commander Viktor Kozlov?" Maria nodded grimly. Everyone in the military knew about Kozlov. The man's crimes were legendary among the troops, bombing hospitals, using children as human shields, torturing prisoners. He represented everything they were fighting against. The war criminal. Intelligence says he's somewhere in these mountains. We've located him. He's holed up in a position about 2,670 meters from our camp. Maria's mind automatically began calculating. Nearly 3 kilometers. The math was staggering. At that distance, even a slight breeze could push a bullet off course by several feet. The curvature of the Earth would affect the trajectory. Temperature and humidity would change the bullet's flight characteristics. It would be like trying to thread a needle in a hurricane while riding a roller coaster. That's an extremely difficult shot," she said carefully. "Impossible, according to 12 of our best marksmen. They've all tried and failed." They had reached the command post now, and Maria could see a group of soldiers gathered around what was obviously a high-powered rifle setup. Even from a distance, she recognized the equipment, a Barrett M82.50 caliber rifle mounted on a precision rest, connected to various measuring instruments. It was the kind of setup that cost more than most people's cars and was designed for exactly this type of extreme long-range shooting. General Blackwood turned as they approached, his steel-gray eyes immediately focusing on Maria with an intensity that made her feel like she was being examined under a microscope. He was older than she had expected, probably in his late 50s, with the kind of weathered face that came from decades of making life and death decisions. "Private Santos," he said without preamble. "Captain Mitchell tells me you have some experience with long-range shooting." Maria felt heat rise in her cheeks. She had always downplayed those incidents, hoping they would be forgotten. The last thing she wanted was to be reassigned from the motor pool to some combat unit where her primary job would be killing people. "Sir, I'm a mechanic." Those were just emergency situations. Emergency situations where you made shots that trained snipers said were impossible. "Sir, with respect, I think those reports were exaggerated. I was just doing what needed to be done to protect my unit." Blackwood studied her for a moment, noting the way she kept her eyes fixed on a point just over his shoulder, not defiant, but not comfortable either. "Private, in about 36 hours, Commander Kozlov is going to move to a new position where we won't be able to reach him. While he's there, he's going to finalize plans for bombing another hospital. 237 people work in that hospital, including 43 children in the pediatric wing." Maria's eyes moved to meet his for the first time, and Blackwood saw something shift in them, a hardness that hadn't been there before. "Sir, what exactly are you asking me to do?" "I'm asking you to look through that scope, and tell me if you think you can make a shot that 12 expert marksmen have failed to make." Maria looked toward the rifle setup, then back at the general. "And if I can't, then we find another way, and a lot of people probably die while we're looking for it." The weight of those words settled on her shoulders like a lead blanket. Maria walked slowly toward the rifle, her mind automatically cataloging the setup. The Barrett was a beautiful weapon, precision-engineered for exactly this type of shot. The scope was military-grade, probably worth more than she made in 6 months. Everything was perfectly calibrated, perfectly aligned. She bent down to look through the scope, adjusting the eyepiece slightly to match her vision. The target area came into sharp focus, a rocky outcrop that looked impossibly far away. She could see movement, tiny figures that she knew were human beings, though at this distance they looked more like ants. "The wind," she murmured, not really speaking to anyone in particular. "Excuse me, Private?" Maria straightened up, her mind still processing what she had seen. "The wind patterns, sir. They're not random. There's a thermal coming up from the valley that creates an updraft about halfway to the target. Then, it gets disrupted by those rock formations and creates a crosswind. But it's not constant. It pulses every 43 to 47 seconds. Sergeant Rodriguez stepped forward, frowning. "Private, how could you possibly know that from looking through a scope for 30 seconds? We've been studying those wind patterns for 3 days with sophisticated meteorological equipment." Maria looked at him, then back toward the distant target. "My grandfather taught me that the earth talks to those who know how to listen. Wind isn't just moving air, it's the mountain breathing, the sun warming stone, the valley channeling pressure. You can see it in how the dust moves, feel it in how the air pressure changes against your skin." She paused, realizing how mystical she sounded to these professional soldiers. "I mean, sir, I've spent a lot of time in mountains. You learn to read weather patterns when your job depends on being outdoors." General Blackwood exchanged glances with Captain Mitchell. There was something about the way Santos spoke about the shot, not with the technical precision of a trained sniper, but with an almost intuitive understanding that seemed to come from somewhere deeper. "Private," Blackwood said quietly, "I need to ask you directly. Do you think you can make this shot?" Maria looked through the scope again, this time spending several minutes studying not just the target, but the entire landscape between her position and the distant rocks. She watched dust patterns, noted how the light reflected off different surfaces, observed the way heat shimmers rose from sun-warmed stone. When she finally straightened up, her face was pale but determined. "Sir, I think maybe I can. But not with this setup." Rodriguez looked incredulous. "Private, that's a $50,000 precision rifle system. What could possibly be wrong with it?" Maria's voice was barely above a whisper when she answered. "It's too perfect. It's designed for ideal conditions, for shots where you can calculate everything in advance. But this shot isn't about calculations. It's about feeling the mountain, understanding the moment when everything aligns." She looked directly at General Blackwood. "Sir, if you want me to try, I'll need to do it my way." General Blackwood stared at Maria Santos for a long moment, processing her request. Around them, the 12 expert marksmen shifted uncomfortably, clearly struggling with the idea that a motor pool mechanic was critiquing their equipment and methods. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Explain what you mean by your way, Private," Blackwood said carefully. Maria looked at the elaborate rifle setup, then back at the general. "Sir, that Barrett is an incredible weapon, but it's designed for stability and precision in controlled environments. All those measuring instruments, the computerized calculations, they're trying to turn shooting into pure science. But at 2,670 meters, science isn't enough. You need intuition." Sergeant Rodriguez stepped forward, his voice tight with frustration. "Private, with respect, intuition doesn't overcome physics. Bullet drop, wind drift, atmospheric pressure. These are mathematical constants that don't care about feelings or intuition." "You're right, sir," Maria replied calmly. "Physics doesn't change. But physics isn't just numbers on a computer screen. It's how the air moves, how gravity pulls, how the earth spins. Those mathematical constants you mentioned, they're not really constant at all. They change every second based on conditions that your instruments can measure, but can't truly understand." She gestured toward the distant target. "That shot has to travel through dozens of different microclimates between here and there. Each one will affect the bullet differently. You can calculate the average conditions, but averages don't hit targets. Reality does." Captain Mitchell spoke up. "What are you suggesting, Private?" Maria took a deep breath, knowing her next words would either convince them or end this conversation. "I need a simpler rifle. Something I can feel, something that communicates with me instead of telling me what computers think should happen. And I need to make the shot at the right moment. Not when the calculations say it's optimal, but when the mountain tells me it's time. The silence that followed was broken by Master Sergeant Thompson, one of the failed marksmen, who let out a bitter laugh. General, this is insane. We're talking about giving one of the most critical shots in recent military history to someone who wants to rely on mystical mountain communication and rifle telepathy. But General Blackwood was studying Maria's face with the intensity of a man who had learned to read people under extreme pressure. What he saw there wasn't arrogance or delusion. It was the quiet confidence of someone who understood something fundamental that others had missed. What kind of rifle do you want, Private? Sir, I saw an M40 in the armory yesterday. Vietnam-era sniper rifle, manual bolt action, no computerized systems. Just a good scope, and a weapon that's been proven in combat for 50 years. Rodriguez looked like he was about to protest again, but Blackwood held up a hand. Why that particular rifle? Maria's voice grew softer, more personal. My grandfather carried an M40 in Vietnam. He taught me to shoot with one just like it. The rifle, it has a personality. You learn to work with it instead of fighting it. When you've fired enough rounds through the same weapon, you start to understand how it behaves in different conditions. It becomes an extension of yourself. Private, Thompson interjected, that rifle is 40 years old. It doesn't have the precision tolerances of modern equipment. The scope is outdated. The ammunition isn't optimized for extreme long-range work. Sergeant, Maria interrupted quietly. How many rounds have you fired through that, Barrett? Thompson looked confused by the question. It's a standard military weapon. I've qualified on it multiple times. That's not what I asked. How many actual rounds have you personally fired through that specific rifle? Maybe 50 rounds over the course of several range sessions. Maria nodded. The M40 I'm talking about has been used by 7 different snipers over the past 15 years. It has over 3,000 rounds through it. That rifle has a history, a personality developed through thousands of hours of use. It's not perfect according to specifications, but it's predictable. I can work with predictable. General Blackwood had been listening to this exchange with growing interest. In his quarter-century of military service, he had learned that sometimes the most unconventional approaches yielded the best results. The 12 expert marksmen had failed using conventional methods and top-of-the-line equipment. Maybe unconventional was exactly what they needed. Get her the M40, he ordered. 20 minutes later, Maria sat on a blanket she had spread on the ground, completely disassembling the vintage sniper rifle. Around her, the marksmen and officers watched in fascination as she examined each component with the same careful attention she gave to engine parts. The bolt has been worn smooth from use, she murmured, running her finger along the metal surface. That's good. No rough edges to create friction inconsistencies. The trigger has been worked on, custom job, probably done by someone who really knew what they were doing. Brake is clean at about 3.5 pounds. She held the barrel up to the light, looking through it like a telescope. Rifling is worn but even. This rifle has been well maintained and properly cleaned. Whoever last used it took care of it. Captain Mitchell knelt beside her. How can you tell all that just by looking? Same way I can tell if an engine is healthy by listening to it run. Tools have personalities, especially tools that have been used hard and maintained well. This rifle. She paused, running her hand along the stock. This rifle has been through a lot, but it's solid, reliable. She began reassembling the weapon with practiced efficiency, her hands moving with the kind of muscle memory that came from years of working with precision instruments. As she worked, she talked, not to anyone in particular, but as if she were thinking out loud. The key to extreme long-range shooting isn't the equipment, it's the connection between the shooter and the weapon. Modern rifles with all their computerized systems create distance between you and the shot. They tell you what should happen instead of letting you feel what will happen. Sergeant Rodriguez, despite his skepticism, found himself drawn into her explanation. What do you mean by feel the shot? Maria finished reassembling the rifle and held it up to her shoulder, sighting through the scope toward the distant target. When you fire a shot at this distance, the bullet is in the air for about 3.5 seconds. A lot happens in 3.5 seconds. Wind changes, atmospheric pressure shifts, your heartbeat affects your breathing. You can't calculate all of that in advance, but you can sense it. She lowered the rifle and looked at Rodriguez directly. You've made thousands of shots, Sergeant. Haven't you ever had one where everything just felt right? Where you knew before you pulled the trigger that it was going to be perfect? Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, remembering. Yes, he said finally. A few times. That's what I'm talking about. The rifle, the conditions, your body, your breathing, everything synchronizes for a moment. You can't force it to happen. You can only recognize it when it does and take advantage of it. General Blackwood checked his watch. Private, we're running out of time. Kozlov's convoy is scheduled to move out in 18 hours. If you're going to take this shot, it needs to be soon. Maria nodded, understanding the pressure but not letting it affect her calm demeanor. Sir, I'll need about an hour to zero this rifle and get familiar with how it shoots. Then, I'll need to observe the target area for several hours, learning the wind patterns and timing. Several hours? Thompson looked incredulous. We've given you all the meteorological data we've collected over 3 days. Wind speed, direction, temperature variations. Sergeant, respectfully, that data tells me what happened yesterday and this morning. I need to know what's happening right now, this moment, and what's likely to happen in the next few hours. Weather is alive. It breathes and changes and responds to things your instruments can't measure. Maria stood up, cradling the M40 like she was holding an old friend. But before I can learn the mountain's rhythm, I need to learn this rifle's personality. Every weapon is slightly different, even identical models. This one will have its own preferences, its own quirks. She looked toward a practice range that had been set up lower on the mountain. Sir, I'd like to fire about 20 rounds at various distances, getting a feel for how this rifle behaves. Then, I'll be ready to start really preparing for the shot. As they walked toward the practice range, Captain Mitchell fell into step beside Maria. Private, can I ask you something personal? Yes, ma'am. Why did you really join the military? And don't say it was for stability and structure. I've read your file. You're too skilled, too observant to have settled for just being a mechanic if you didn't want to be. Maria was quiet for a long time before answering. My grandfather told me something when I was young. He said that God gives people gifts, but the gifts come with responsibilities. Some people get the gift of healing, so they become doctors. Some get the gift of teaching, so they become teachers. She paused, adjusting the rifle sling on her shoulder. I got the gift of seeing patterns that other people miss, in machines, in weather, in other things. But gifts like mine can be used to take lives or to protect them. I chose to fix trucks and help people because I thought that was the right way to use what I'd been given. And now, Maria looked toward the distant mountain where Viktor Kozlov was hiding among innocent civilians, planning his next attack on a hospital full of children. Now I think maybe God didn't give me this gift just to fix engines. Maybe sometimes protecting people means doing something harder than I wanted to do. The practice range came into view ahead of them, and Maria Santos began the process of preparing for the most important shot of her life. A shot that would either save hundreds of lives or prove that some targets really were impossible to hit. The sun was beginning to set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley as Maria Santos lay prone behind the M40, her eye pressed to the scope. She had been in this position for over 3 hours, not moving except to occasionally shift her weight or take a sip of water. To the observers watching her, it looked like nothing was happening. But Maria was having an intense conversation with the mountain. During the afternoon practice session, she had learned the M40's personality through 20 carefully placed shots. The rifle pulled slightly left at distances over 1,000 meters, probably due to a microscopic imperfection in the barrel that no instrument could detect, but that revealed itself through repeated shooting. The trigger broke cleanly, but had a tiny bit of creep that required a specific rhythm to master. Most importantly, the rifle responded best to a smooth, almost gentle shooting style rather than the aggressive precision techniques taught in sniper schools. She's been lying there for hours, Master Sergeant Thompson whispered to Sergeant Rodriguez. What could she possibly be learning that we haven't already measured? Rodriguez, who had been watching Maria with growing fascination, shook his head. I'm not sure, but look at her breathing pattern. Look at how still she is. I've seen a lot of snipers prepare for difficult shots, but never anything like this. Maria was indeed breathing in a slow, rhythmic pattern that seemed synchronized with something only she could sense. Every few minutes, She would make tiny adjustments to her position or the rifle's aim, movements so small they were barely visible, but each one deliberate and purposeful. Through the scope, she had been watching the target area with an intensity that bordered on meditation. She had identified Kozlov himself, a tall man in dark clothing who appeared briefly in the scope's field of view every 12 to 15 minutes, always in the same location for exactly 37 to 42 seconds before disappearing back into the rocky shelter. But more than watching Kozlov, Maria had been learning the rhythm of the wind. Just as she had told the others, the air movement wasn't random. The valley created thermal updrafts as the sun-heated rocks released their warmth. These thermals were disrupted by the irregular mountain terrain, creating swirling patterns that changed in predictable cycles. She had identified the cycle. Every 43 to 47 seconds, the wind would calm for a period of 8 to 12 seconds. During those brief moments, the air between her position and the target was as still as it ever got. But, even more importantly, she had begun to sense something else, a deeper rhythm that had nothing to do with weather. "Captain Mitchell," Maria called softly without moving her eye from the scope. Mitchell approached and knelt beside her. "What do you need, Private?" "I need you to radio the intel team. Ask them exactly what time Kozlov usually makes his evening radio contact with his command structure." Mitchell looked puzzled, but relayed the request. A few minutes later, she returned with the answer. "Intelligence says he makes contact every day between 1847 and 1851 hours. Today that would be." She checked her watch. "In about 23 minutes. "And the calls usually last how long?" 3 to 4 minutes, according to intercepted communications. Maria nodded slightly, a piece of the puzzle falling into place in her mind. "He'll be stationary during that call. No movement, focused on the radio instead of watching for threats. That's when the mountain will give me the shot." General Blackwood had been listening to this exchange from a few meters away. "Private, are you ready to take the shot?" "Almost, sir. I need to wait for the right moment. All the conditions have to align: wind, target position, atmospheric stability. Forcing the shot when conditions aren't perfect would just waste the opportunity." The general checked his watch nervously. Intelligence had confirmed that Kozlov's convoy would begin moving before dawn, less than 10 hours away. This might be their only chance. As they waited, Maria continued her patient observation, occasionally murmuring comments that revealed her thought process. "Humidity is dropping as the temperature cools. That will increase bullet velocity slightly, but also make the air denser lower in the valley. Thermal activity is decreasing but still present. The bullet will ride the updraft for the first 800 meters, then encounter crosswinds. Target is maintaining routine. Stress levels appear normal. No indication he suspects surveillance." Sergeant Rodriguez found himself studying Maria's technique with professional interest. He had trained dozens of snipers, but he had never seen anyone prepare for a shot quite like this. There was something almost mystical about her approach, yet it was also intensely practical and based on careful observation. 1847 hours, Captain Mitchell announced quietly. Maria's breathing became even more controlled, her body settling into absolute stillness. Through the scope, she could see increased activity around the target area as Kozlov prepared for his daily communication with headquarters. "Movement in the target zone," she whispered. "Kozlov is taking position for the radio call." The entire observation team held their breath, watching as Maria made microscopic adjustments to her aim. The crosshairs in her scope were trained on empty space, but she was tracking the spot where Kozlov would appear based on his established pattern. Wind is cycling down, thermal activity decreasing, atmospheric pressure stabilizing. At exactly 1848 hours, Viktor Kozlov stepped into view in the scope, holding a military radio to his ear. He was positioned exactly where Maria had predicted, in a small clearing between two large rocks that provided him with cover from most angles, but left him exposed to the one impossible shot that no one should have been able to make. Maria's finger moved to the trigger, but she didn't apply pressure yet. She was waiting for something that only she could sense, the moment when all the variables would align for the brief window that physics would allow. "Target acquired," she whispered. "Conditions approaching optimal." The seconds ticked by with agonizing slowness. Kozlov remained in position, apparently deep in conversation with his commanders, unaware that death was studying him through a scope from nearly 3 kilometers away. Wind cycle beginning. Thermal stability increasing, pressure steady. Maria's breathing slowed even further, her heart rate dropping to a barely detectable rhythm. The rifle became an extension of her body, perfectly aligned and stable. Conditions optimal in 3, 2, 1. At that moment, everything came together exactly as Maria had sensed it would. The wind between her position and the target dropped to absolute calm. The atmospheric pressure stabilized. Kozlov stood motionless, focused on his radio call. The thermal updrafts aligned perfectly to carry the bullet along its 3-second journey. Maria felt rather than heard the mountain give her permission. She squeezed the trigger. The M40 bucked against her shoulder with a sound like controlled thunder. The muzzle flash briefly illuminated the gathering darkness, and then everything was silent except for the wind whistling through the mountain peaks. Time of flight approximately 3.2 seconds, Maria announced calmly, keeping her eye on the scope to observe the impact. Everyone held their breath, counting the seconds. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. Through the scope, Maria watched Viktor Kozlov suddenly jerk and collapse, the radio flying from his hand as he fell behind the rocky outcrop that had been sheltering him. Target down, she said quietly. Single shot, center mass. Confirmed kill. The observation team erupted in amazed chatter, but Maria remained motionless behind the rifle, continuing to watch the target area through her scope. Professional snipers always observed after a shot to confirm the kill and watch for threats or complications. General Blackwood knelt beside her, his voice filled with something between awe and disbelief. Private Santos, that was impossible. How did you know when to take the shot? Maria finally lifted her head from the scope, her face calm and slightly sad. Sir, the mountain told me when everything was aligned. The wind, the pressure, the target, my breathing, the rifle's natural point of aim. For about 2 seconds, everything came together perfectly. It doesn't happen often, but when it does, you have to be ready to recognize it. She sat up slowly, her legs stiff from hours of motionless observation. Sir, I need to confirm something with intelligence. We need to verify that we got the right target and that there were no civilian casualties. As Captain Mitchell radioed for confirmation, Maria began the careful process of cleaning and securing the M40. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, but her expression was thoughtful and somber. You don't look like someone who just made the shot of a lifetime, Sergeant Rodriguez observed. Maria looked up at him, then toward the distant mountain where Viktor Kozlov's body lay motionless among the rocks. Sergeant, I'm glad we stopped him from hurting more innocent people. I'm glad those hospital workers and children are going to be safe. But I don't celebrate taking a human life, even when it's necessary. She finished cleaning the rifle and stood up, cradling the weapon that had just performed beyond all reasonable expectations. My grandfather told me that taking a life changes you, even when you're saving others. He was right. Captain Mitchell approached with the radio confirmation. Intelligence confirms positive identification of Viktor Kozlov, deceased. No civilian casualties. The remaining members of his cell have surrendered to local authorities. General Blackwood nodded grimly. Private Santos, what you accomplished today will save hundreds of lives. That hospital bombing Kozlov was planning would have been catastrophic. Maria shouldered the M40 and looked toward the motor pool where her broken-down supply truck was waiting for her attention. Sir, I'm glad we could help those people. But if it's all the same to you, I'd like to get back to fixing trucks now. As she walked away into the gathering darkness, the 12 expert marksmen who had failed to make the impossible shot stood in respectful silence, understanding that they had just witnessed something that couldn't be taught in any military school. The perfect fusion of skill, intuition, and moral purpose that turned an ordinary soldier into a legend. 3 months after the impossible shot that eliminated Viktor Kozlov, the military camp had returned to its normal routine. Supply trucks rumbled through the mountain passes, helicopters delivered personnel and equipment, and the endless business of maintaining a forward operating base continued without interruption. But for those who had witnessed Maria Santos make a shot that defied all conventional wisdom, nothing would ever be quite the same. Maria herself had returned to the motor pool as if nothing extraordinary had happened. She spent her days elbow-deep in engines, solving mechanical problems with the same intuitive understanding she had applied to reading wind patterns and atmospheric conditions. To most of the camp, she remained just another mechanic, competent, quiet, and unremarkable. But word of the shot had spread through unofficial channels, the way all truly significant military stories do. Soldiers whispered about the mechanic who had succeeded where 12 expert marksmen had failed, using an outdated rifle and methods that seemed to border on mysticism. The story grew with each telling, becoming the kind of legend that would be shared around military bases for decades to come. General Blackwood had tried repeatedly to convince Maria to transfer to a sniper unit, or at least to accept advanced marksmanship training that would formalize her extraordinary skills. Each time, she politely declined, explaining that she preferred fixing things to breaking them, and that her calling was to help keep the camp's vehicles running rather than to take more lives. "Sir, what happened with Kozlov was necessary," she had told him during their final conversation about the transfer. "But it was also exceptional circumstances. I don't want to become someone whose primary job is killing, even when the targets deserve it. I want to remain someone who fixes things." The general had been disappointed, but not entirely surprised. In his experience, people with the rarest and most valuable skills often had the clearest understanding of how those skills should be used. Maria Santos had proven that she could make impossible shots, but, more importantly, she had proven that she would only make them when absolutely necessary. The impact of Kozlov's elimination had rippled far beyond the mountain camp. Intelligence reports confirmed that his death had effectively dismantled one of the region's most dangerous terrorist cells. The hospital bombing he had been planning was canceled, and 2 other planned attacks were abandoned as his network of contacts fell apart without his leadership. Dr. Sarachan, the chief administrator of the hospital that would have been Kozlov's next target, received a classified briefing about how close her facility had come to disaster. She never learned the name of the soldier who had saved her hospital, but she made a point of visiting every military medical facility in the region over the following months, personally thanking the personnel for their service and dedication. The 43 children in the pediatric wing continued their treatments and recovery, unaware that their lives had been saved by a mechanic with an old rifle and an intuitive understanding of mountain physics. Their laughter echoed through hospital corridors that would have been silent if not for Maria's single, perfectly placed shot. Captain Mitchell had written a detailed after-action report that attempted to analyze exactly how Maria had succeeded where others had failed. The report became required reading at the military's advanced sniper schools, though instructors struggled to incorporate its lessons into formal training programs. How do you teach someone to listen to the mountain, or to feel when conditions are optimal? The report's conclusion was both profound and frustrating for military planners. Private Santos succeeded not despite her unconventional approach, but because of it. Her techniques cannot be easily replicated or taught through standard methods. Her success demonstrates that exceptional situations sometimes require exceptional individuals who operate beyond the boundaries of conventional training and doctrine. Sergeant Rodriguez had been deeply affected by witnessing Maria's shot. He found himself questioning some of his own rigid adherence to technical specifications and computer-generated firing solutions. In training sessions with new marksmen, he began emphasizing the importance of developing intuition alongside technical skills, though he struggled to explain exactly what that meant. "There's something beyond the mathematics," he would tell his students. "Something you can only learn by paying attention to details that aren't in any manual. The best shooters I've known could sense things that instruments couldn't measure." Master Sergeant Thompson had initially been skeptical of Maria's unconventional methods, but the undeniable success of her shot had forced him to reconsider some of his assumptions about precision shooting. He began incorporating discussions about environmental awareness and intuitive decision-making into his advanced courses, acknowledging that the most technically perfect shot was worthless if it wasn't taken at the right moment. The M40 rifle that Maria had used for the shot was cleaned, cataloged, and placed in the base armory, but it was never used for another critical mission. Some of the soldiers began to think of it as a special weapon, one that had been blessed by its participation in an impossible accomplishment. Whenever new marksmen examined it, they invariably asked about the mechanic who had used it to make a shot that no one thought could be made. 6 months after Kozlov's death, Maria received an unusual request. A military historian was compiling a classified study of exceptional individual performances in modern combat situations, and he wanted to interview her about the techniques she had used. Maria agreed to the interview, though she was characteristically modest about her accomplishment. "I don't think what I did can be taught in a classroom," she told the historian. "It's not about special techniques or secret knowledge. It's about paying attention to everything around you and trusting what your experience tells you, even when it contradicts what instruments and calculations suggest." When asked about the moment she decided to take the shot, Maria was thoughtful for a long time before answering. It wasn't really a decision in the normal sense. It was more like recognition. All the conditions had aligned perfectly, and I could sense that the opportunity was there. If I had hesitated or tried to double-check the calculations, the moment would have passed. The historian pressed her for more technical details, but Maria struggled to explain something that was fundamentally intuitive rather than analytical. It's like asking a musician to explain how they know when to play a note, or asking a mechanic to explain how they know an engine is healthy just by listening to it. You develop a feel for it through experience and attention, but you can't really break it down into steps that someone else can follow. 1 year after the shot, intelligence services confirmed that the elimination of Viktor Kozlov had prevented not just the hospital bombing, but a coordinated series of attacks that would have killed over 1,000 civilians across 3 countries. The ripple effects of stopping his network had disrupted terrorist operations throughout the region. Maria learned about this expanded impact during a brief meeting with General Blackwood, who thought she deserved to know the full consequences of her actions. She listened quietly to the briefing, asking no questions and making no comments until the general had finished. "Sir," she said finally, "I'm grateful that so many people are safe. But I hope you understand that I still don't want to be a professional soldier in that sense. What happened with Kozlov was necessary, but I don't want it to define who I am or what my role in the military should be." Blackwood nodded, understanding that some people were most valuable precisely because they insisted on remaining exactly who they were. "Private Santos, the military needs mechanics as much as it needs snipers. Maybe more. You've proven that you can rise to extraordinary challenges when necessary, but your everyday service keeping our vehicles running is just as important to our mission." As Maria returned to her work in the motor pool, she carried with her the quiet satisfaction of knowing that her grandfather's lessons about gifts and responsibilities had guided her correctly. She had used her abilities to protect innocent people when no one else could, but she had also remained true to her deeper calling as someone who fixed things rather than destroyed them. The broken supply truck that she had been repairing on the day General Blackwood summoned her was still in service, running smoothly through mountain roads that had claimed dozens of other vehicles. Maria took particular pride in that truck, seeing it as a symbol of her true purpose, keeping essential systems running so that others could do their jobs and return home safely to their families. In quiet moments between repairs, she sometimes thought about the shot that had made her a legend among military marksmen. But mostly, she focused on the present, the engine that needed attention, the convoy that needed reliable transportation, the soldiers who depended on her skills to maintain the vehicles that kept them safe. Maria Santos had proven that extraordinary abilities, applied at the right moment with the right motivation, could accomplish the impossible. But, more importantly, she had proven that choosing when and how to use those abilities was what separated true heroism from mere skill. She remained in the motor pool not because she lacked other options, but because she understood that some callings were more important than recognition or advancement. The mountain where Viktor Kozlov had died continued to change with the seasons, its rocks weathered by wind and rain, its valleys carved deeper by the endless passage of time. But the precision and purpose that had guided a single bullet across 2,670 meters of impossible distance had become part of its story, a testament to what could be achieved when skill, necessity, and moral clarity came together in one perfect, unrepeatable moment. Maria Santos went back to fixing trucks, secure in the knowledge that when the world needed the impossible from her again, she would be ready. But, until that moment came, she was exactly where she belonged, keeping the everyday machinery of peace and protection running smoothly, one repair at a time.